what is your definition of atheism? I bet it's not what most folks mean when they use that word. I don't know what most folks mean. My definition of atheism, and I have to be careful here and nuanced and like careful and precise in my wording because some people will just be like, well, we don't believe any beliefs. So first I'll say atheism is just a lack of belief in God. Okay, so it can be formulated that way. It can be formulated as lack of belief, but I also think it can be formulated as that there are no gods. And now it's a positive formulation as opposed to a negative formulation. Negative formulation, a proposition would be that no gods exist, okay, or a lack of belief in any gods. And then, well, sorry, one of those was positive. First one was positive. So lack of gods, lack of belief would be a negative formulation, or you can formulate it positively that there are no gods. And if you're making a positive, which I think, first of all, I think those are logically equivalent. A lack of belief is just, you can either do this, you can, well, actually, they're not logically equivalent, so I should be careful with that. Again, you gotta be careful with these things. But here's the thing. So regardless of what you characterize atheism as, I think that every atheist has, in addition to thinking that God doesn't exist or that God doesn't exist or whatever God doesn't exist, or it's a lack of belief in any gods, I think below that, beneath that is a different presumption that's more fundamental with respect to the worldview, all right? And that is always formulated positively. Like, so it's going to be a belief in naturalism, okay? It's going to be a belief in the materialism or something. And those, I think, if I'm a Christian, like, which I am, and I'm a Christian theist, those are the ones I go after, because I don't think that, so what do you mean by inputting belief into other people's heads? I'm going off experience and the fact that everybody has a worldview. So my experience is anecdotal, and I have a lot of experience discussing with atheists, and I have a lot of experience reading atheists. And so I don't know what you mean by, you know, asserting that others deep inside think that there is a God. I'm not asserting, but I'm just answering your question, bro. I'm not asserting that you believe or that person believes or this is not a particular claim. It's definitional. I'm asserting what definitionally speaking, what atheism is. Like, you asked me a question, how would you define atheism? I'm just giving you the answer. And hey, if you adhere to this atheism definition that I'm describing, then that would mean that you affirm that that's the belief in your mind. Like, I'm not doing it for you. People believe that. So they don't know what you're talking about. If I don't, now that's a better question. If I don't have a belief in God, does that mean that I think no God exists? Not necessarily. Those aren't logically equivalent, right? Because it could be that I think I've just never considered the question of whether a God exists, right? Suppose that I'm born and I'm raised atheist, or with respect, framed in this way, as you put it, I don't have any belief in God. This has just never been presented to me, right? That doesn't mean that, so if I'm raised like that, then I will not have any conception of God either. And so I have no conception of God to deny or reject. So, but I don't think anybody in this chat can claim ignorance with respect to not knowing any conception of God whatsoever. Like, that's not the position that any of us find ourselves in. Like, we have conceptions of God. And so when we are denying that, when we say I completely lack belief in God, look, I would say that's probably more closely defined as agnosticism, right? That is so in epistemology, there are three belief attitudes. There are belief, there are disbelief, and there are withholding belief. So agnosticism, I would consider much more close to withholding. Like, not with respect to like I'm actively withholding, but maybe I've just never encountered the proposition, right? Like the existence of God. Well, what God? Because I've never even considered any conception of God whatsoever. So I don't even know what gods you're talking about. But as I said, nobody in the chat can feign ignorance about this. We all, especially since you're here, especially since you're hearing my voice right now, none of us can feign ignorance with respect to what knowing, and having in mind some conception of God, which they either affirm or reject. So, that's, yeah. So, yeah, I appreciate this. And boy, do I appreciate it, Exy. Music, word roots don't always dictate the modern meaning. Absolutely. Yeah. I'm kind of a language nerd. I love etymology. It's kind of my side hobby here. If you go to I get no hits or no benefit from anybody ever looking at this stuff. But if you are also a language nerd, I'm going to drop in the chat my section on my website, which is it's my dissertation. But if you scroll way to the bottom, you'll see like just this fascination with words. And also there's another section of the website that just talks about language and language development and so on. So it's really hard, and it hurts me to admit that you're right, XD Music. The etymology does not always dictate the modern meaning. But I think it, I am not a language, I'm not of the mind of the certain philosophical persuasion according to which language use dictates meaning. Like I'm not fully bought in. I think it partially dictates meaning, but I don't think it fully dictates meaning. Yeah. So to follow up on earlier topic we were in the middle of, agnosticism about knowledge. Yeah, but knowledge of what? I lack knowledge. I'm withholding. So, I mean, call it what you, this actually, hey, this comes to prove your point, XE Music. And then the idea that gnosis in or gnosis in Greek, gnosis does mean knowledge, and is obviously the negation of that, negation of knowledge, but knowledge of what? The no knowledge. You can probably see that means a lot of things. Think about knowledge of this, knowledge of that, knowledge of that. But an agnostic with respect to theistic belief is always going to be someone who just is in the middle, is withholding, doesn't either affirm nor deny, right? So it's that withholding position. That's where I would put the agnostic. I mean, but you can use agnostic, the term, in all sorts of different variations of meaning and so on. So, yeah, and so yes, I just said that it's not in the middle. Yeah, must fill a blank. Yeah. So you guys agree? Yeah. So there's a like a non-standard, non-technical sense of the word agnostic. I mean, you could say, well, I'm agnostic about this philosophical view or whatnot. Yeah, that's totally fine. But in its context of using philosophy or religion, if you ever come across the word agnostic and you don't immediately think with respect to theistic belief, then I mean that's an obvious sort of usage there. Yeah. So, Michael, that's a great question. I would have to read up on this because I'm not familiar with this terminology, and I must confess ignorance here. And so I've heard the terms, and I've seen them their usages. So an agnostic theist, an agnostic, maybe you guys can help me understand this. We're all helping each other learn. But if you follow that sort of spectrum, right? Atheism over here, theism over here, and then agnosticism in the middle. I suppose that an agnostic, whichever side I put theist, agnostic theist would go over here, and agnostic atheist would go over here. It might, and correct me if I'm wrong, characterize the confidence in your agnosticism or the leanings with respect to what you desire to be true. But it's yeah, one believes, the other doesn't. So it's interesting because so a theist, by definition, then wouldn't be agnostic. Unless you mean something like a fideist, right? So a fideist is somebody who thinks that you can't have reason, so you can't know. Or, different formulation, they think that faith is all required to know. And so could there be this further position according to which you believe in God, but you don't know the God? Sure. Yeah. If you wanted to use those terminology, like I've never seen a good spectrum like chart or graph that shows these, again, because like people self-label, they self-identify as this or that. And so it's still kind of a, and this is all the rage with respect to online and interests and so on. So people are going to identify differently.